members, this is the wireless carve out from the bill. What it is 5% of the appropriation for broadband, $750,000 goes to that. What it does is up to $300 the installation costs. Up to half the cost, $300 may use for the satellite installation, and then a monthly incentive, monthly subsidy for only 1 year of $50 a month. So a grantee would receive no more than $900 for access to high-speed internet. This would only be available in unserved territories in the state of Minnesota. And I offer this amendment if there's any discussion on the amendment. Representative News, Lehman, and Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure it is no surprise that I don't support the amendment. And I would just suggest that I live in a very underserved area, and so I've looked extensively into the different satellite options, and I just have concern about the satellite options. I certainly appreciate looking at other options. My concern is just that until the satellite companies lift their data caps, it's just not a viable option for most families. Currently, the two main companies, HughesNet and Viasat, have 50 gig data caps, and the average family is using over 200 per month. And so the reality is that means for about a week and a half, we will have good internet service, and for the rest of the month, I can quote from the Viasat website, once you hit your data cap, there's a disclaimer that it may greatly impair your ability to use the internet after you hit that 50 gigabytes. And so for that reason, I think that this is just not a tenable option.
Representative Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to say a couple of things about the bill. I was the author of the broadband bill. And the reason I agreed to author it is because it was a big ask. It was in excess of $51 million, but it was based on a calculation that we had asked the Broadband Task Force to do for us last year. And I think it was actually, maybe it was Representative Mahoney that asked the question. The question was, when are we done with broadband, and how much is it going to cost? And I thought that was a good question. And so I think the task force took that seriously, and they calculated that right now there's 252,000 unserved households that will not meet the broadband goals that the state of Minnesota has set. So they figured out it costs a little bit more than $5,000 per connection, $5,500, and they came out with a figure, and then they figured 50% of that, because the broadband program that we're currently using has the state of Minnesota participating at a level of about 50%. And then it subtracted out from that federal funding that's available and came up with a dollar amount. And then they divided that out by 4, because they're looking at accomplishing the Minnesota broadband goals, border-to-border broadband, in 4 years. But to accomplish that, they came up with a figure, of $71,482,000 per biennium. So if they received $71 million per biennium in 4 years, they are saying we would meet our broadband goals. And last year, in this biennium, we were able to come up with $20 million. So you subtract $20 million from $71 million, you get $51 million, and that was the ask this year in the broadband goal. We purposely did not include any policy changes. We know that we'd like to look at some of those, but we did not include it in the bill because we just wanted to reach the goal. And so we kept it to a funding bill only. And I'm really pleased we had broad bipartisan support. No problem in getting people to sign on to the bill. It looks like we're not going to get 51 million. We're going to get 15 million. And but we're really pleased because that's frankly all the general fund money this committee had, and we got all of it. So we're pleased with that. But I also just want to commend the chair for pushing the envelope and pushing the thinking. He's a techie. And I like pilot projects, and we had talked about doing a pilot in northeastern Minnesota, and I would have enjoyed doing that because, as Representative New said, it doesn't work, and at least we could have data to show that it's not quite there yet. I think they're going to be putting, as I talked to the satellite people, it's a lot of money to send like $1 billion to send a satellite up, but they will be continuing to produce new technology and improve the satellite technology, and I hope that someday it really does work. Right now it doesn't. And I would like to, I'm going to vote against your amendment, Mr. Chair. I like pilot projects, and I enjoyed the opportunity to think about doing something in northeastern Minnesota, but I want to keep the eye on the ball, and that is to meet our goals and connect all of Minnesota with fiber. Thank you.
Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Most people, when they are presenting an amendment, can kind of talk to what they're trying to accomplish and how they're going to relay that back to the committee that has jurisdiction. This is a very simple amendment, $750,000 a couple of years, but I don't know what the end results will be from your amendment. I don't know how I would know whether these satellite users would live up to what Representative New was talking about. They're having trouble with their data limits, or they're not. We don't know. I think one or two of the members have spoken about the idea of reception. So we wouldn't know whether that particular, and I don't know how many people this would serve. So my question, whether they had reception or had problems with trees, barns, whether they're fire code safety or not, or clouds. So it may or may not be a good idea. My question would be, how do we know what this $750,000 buys? Did it do a good job? Did it prove something right or prove something wrong? Your amendment is what it is, but I think it misses something when you don't put some way of accounting for whether it's a good idea or bad idea. So I'm likely to vote against this amendment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Mahoney, and I'll address your concerns in my closing comments. Representative Baker, then Metzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I had a question for the author, and you want to wait for that, but maybe my question would be, as we've worked on broadband for a number of years here, and I think we've been trying to maximize our investments with matching dollars, I'm wondering how these satellite companies are going to be part of that matching program. If you're saving that to your closing comments, but I would like to kind of understand the differences here, is that, as I see it, the satellite is already deployed. It's ready to go, and I think in some areas it might be a good option. I like to keep our options open with technology, so I support that concept. But for matching dollars and how they will step in and help reach more people with their investments is what we've been thinking of anyway in the broadband policy. Help me understand the matching, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Chair.
Sure, Representative Baker, and why don't I'll address that in my closing comments.
Okay. Again, I think, thank you. I think, again, I don't support it because I don't understand the matching part of it. But also, as I see part of the bill here, 3.29 in the section, 50% of the total cost of satellite broadband equipment installed would be used for this too. Most installations in satellite are free already. It's part of the incentive of getting satellite, and so I think a lot of the incentives to sign up are already paid for. The equipment is already there. I think part of broadband is deploying, whether it's wireless, whether it's fiber, other ideas, but I don't see where this investment from the state then needs to be made in this component. And because, again, along with Senator Lehman or Representative Lehman's comments about 15 million, it's tight, but I'm happy with that. I don't want to trim any more out of that if I don't think it's going to deploy more better quality that's there. So with that, I will not be supporting the amendment.
Representative Metzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And one of the things I've learned on this committee is you do push the envelope in terms of thinking outside the box. And I've enjoyed that these last 4 years. And I think on broadband in particular, when we're thinking about it, we've got to be focused. There are some areas that will just never realistically have the capability of having a line drawn into their home. And I think the amendment needs a little bit more work, but I think we should be looking at technology from an agnostic point of view in this committee and making sure that we are providing the communities and people who live, at the end of that road, the best alternative. And I think just one thing to clarify that you had brought up, Representative New, was the caps. And I've discussed caps for quite a while in this committee. They exist on your cell phone. They exist on your home internet, unless you're paying for unlimited coverage. They exist everywhere right now. And the companies want you to go over on the cap, so you end up paying. And I think it's a little disingenuous to say that, this is different in that way, because most people aren't paying for unlimited service. I have two internet lines coming in my house. One is a CenturyLink line, one is a Mediacom, and they both have their benefits. I have unlimited service on the CenturyLink, and I pay a premium for that. And the Mediacom just offers a faster internet for streaming and other things that my wife and I enjoy as a younger family, and many other families enjoy around the state. But we should be focused in this committee on making sure that we aren't allowing these companies with these state dollars, the federal dollars that were released for matching, to continue capping data on people and limiting their access based on their financial means. Because one thing we can do to allow people to get a little smarter, our kids to learn a little more, is to have them be able to access information at their fingertips, which I appreciate all these companies in the same token being able to offer. But we've got to get rid of the idea of you got to pay to play, pay to learn, pay to search. And that's one thing I hope we can work on with it moving forward. But I am glad that we've got some funding in here. And as always, Mr. Chair, in my closing comments in this, I'd like to really thank you for your work on broadband. I know that you've been a strong proponent of it for many years and enjoy funding it as much as we all do. So, thank you.
In fact, no one has chief authored more bills signed into law for broadband than Zach Ruffalo. Representative Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments. What I like about this bill is that it offers options. Not everything is going to work for every household. That's one of the things I do like. I like the fact that in the broadband report, they estimate at $5,500 per customer to get everybody hooked up in the state. And this is about $900 per customer on this, according to what the bill's written. I like that. It's much, much cheaper than putting a line in the ground. And and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the statute says, 25 down and 3 up. So there is nothing in the statute about caps anywhere. It just says you have to have a speed. You could put the cap at half a gig and it'd still be, half a meg, I guess, not a gig, a half a meg, and it would still fit the statute if you put a wire in the ground. So the caps thing is a totally different issue than actually just being connected to broadband.
Representative New again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to address this idea of caps, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Representative Metza. I think the caps are an issue because a lot of standard internet companies, they'll have caps, but really the caps are like 300 gigs a month. And so in reality, they don't actually impede data usage. I know for my fixed wireless, I do not have data caps for my fixed wireless. And I would just add that the reality is even with satellite, you can get additional data. It's just extraordinarily expensive for the user. So for HughesNet, initially, if you sign a 2-year contract, it's $100 a month for 50 gigs of data. If you do not sign that 2-year contract, contract is $130 a month. Viasat is even more expensive at $150 a month with the 2-year commitment. And last year when I looked into HughesNet, I apologize that I did not pull it up right now, but for an additional 25 gigs of data, it was $75. So, I mean, even if, well, you can see how that adds up very quickly. You're up to several $100s a month, even just for 100 gigs of data. So, yes, there are caps in other programs. However, many of those caps are set high enough such that the average family will never hit them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this amendment. I am in an underserved area. I have fixed wireless, which now doesn't have data caps. My old provider did. But I just want to be clear on the caps. 50 gig for HughesNet. And full disclosure, I used to work for Hughes when they started back in the 90s in California. The 50 gig cap is more data than you would need for doing all of your home health care, all of your kids' homework. The only thing that where we hit the caps is streaming Netflix and Amazon and HBO Go and all these other online programs, basically watching TV. And as a government, we're not in the business of subsidizing people to watch TV. We're in the business of, we're pushing this forward so that kids can do homework and people can get access to their doctors and information and the essential needs of people to connect to the internet. We shouldn't be talking about data caps because this 50 gig is which is the lowest now. It will always go up from there. It's not going to apply to the things that we were trying to bring people. So I'm a supporter of this bill, and I know that the numbers that have come back on what we've paid to bring fiber to people's houses is just under $6,000 per household, but we went after the low-hanging fruit to start with. These are the largest clusters of houses. As we try to bring internet to people more and more rural, that number is going to go up. I live a mile off of the nearest possible line where they're going to bring it, and for me it was $11,000 to trench fiber to my house. And I pay over $100 a month for my fixed Wi-Fi. It's the cost of what we need, because I need to get access to the internet. But I support this bill. It's a very inexpensive option. And for me, this also bridges the gap for the next few years until these lower non-stationary satellites can be in place to bring super high-speed internet, hopefully without caps, to everywhere in the world. The technology is moving quickly. It's not just the United States that has underserved areas, it's every place else in the world. And we're going to bring satellites. I mean, this is going to change so rapidly, and spending $1 billion to bring fiber to every household in Minnesota doesn't make sense. This is a great option, and I support it. Thank you for bringing it forward, Mr. Chair.
Representative Baker again.
Thanks again. I just want to be clear that, again, I don't have a big issue with including satellite in our language with our drive to have more options. It's the carve out of the $750,000 that I don't see the customer getting it. So to Representative Munson's comments, I think you're right. I mean, you have that right now to pick up the Hughes, and you could give them a call, and you could free installation, and you can get this right now. So why are we spending state money to help folks that's available to you now when it's available to you there? That was the whole idea of this process. The problem with that is because of commercial uses can't really use it because of the caps. And maybe it's not affordable that we wanted to, but our mission here has always been, let's not waste a single state dollar on broadband grants when we have federal dollars coming in through CAF2. We've got some ACAM money coming in around the corners as well with some smaller technology folks. I just want to make sure that if we're carving out the $750,000 to this, the only people I see winning are the satellite companies, because they're the ones who are going to get the money because they're already offering free installation. And so I just want to understand that, and I know the chair will cover that in his closing comments, but I don't mind satellite as an option as long as we don't take it out of our expanding our lines now. I just wanted to make that point.
Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, which you'll probably cover in your closing statements, but for folks applying for a grant of $300 or $600 to this pot of money, any estimate of the cost to administer the program? And maybe you'll cover that in your closing.
Have your note down right here. I'll cover all the questions. If I miss any, people can come back to me. Representative Howe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess my concern is, and I'm hoping this will solve my problem. I would love to be able to put satellite in and have it work for me, because I live in an area that I think is, when you look at the map, it shows that
I'm served. The problem is, I'm not. There's 3 houses sitting in a row that have no access. You go across the highway, they've got cable. You go the 4th house down, they've got CenturyLink. But where I sit, I get it off a silo a mile and a half away, and it's just above dial-up. So I'm interested to see if we're going to use the map to identify who's unserved or underserved. That's one thing, but then how do I get into the mix? Thank you, Mr. Chair. I look forward to your comments at the close.
Representative Lehman, again.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I don't want to belabor this, but I just wanted to respond. I heard somebody talk about the fact that we should be agnostic in our technology, and I just want to assure folks that we are. The current broadband program is agnostic as it relates to technology. It is firm, however, in its broadband speed goals. And so, as Representative Baker articulated very well, the state determined that it was worthwhile to put public money to help communities reach their speed goals. They didn't care what kind of technology was used. Currently, if satellite can reach the speed goals, that would be fabulous, and I hope that we get there at some point. We're not there right now, but just want to make it clear that the current program is agnostic as it relates to technology. Thank you.
Any closing comments before the final words from the author of the amendment? I'll try to crank through all these. Representative New, you made concerns regarding this. Keep in mind that this is limited to only those who are in unserved areas. So if you are a person who has no hope of being in an underserved area or in a served area, these are the people who are, we hear these stories about people who have access to nothing. That's who this pilot project would be focused on. Representative Mahoney, you bring up a valid point. The intent of this is to get service to approximately 1,000 households as a test. I'm not opposed to putting a reporting requirement in there, some sort of feedback to ask people how the service worked for them should this bill be enacted. Representative Baker, with regards to your question, what was your question? Yeah, so if you look at 3.29 and 3.30, you can see 50% of the total cost of satellite broadband equipment installed at user locations up to $300, or you can look it over, $600 in monthly satellite broadband subscription charges. So we're going to be empowering in that situation, there's going to be some flexibility there. What the chair's intent is that this would be a reimbursement program. So when it comes to the idea of matching, obviously the provider has sufficiently provided any match they could because they spent billions of dollars putting devices in geosynchronous orbit. So that's kind of their match. They've done the capital outlay on the front side. With regards to the family or the household that would be purchasing this, their monthly cost should be at or around that area of $50. So there's going to have some match in that as well. And this is not in perpetuity. This is just for the first year. If people have follow-up questions, you can address that with me when I'm done. In terms of whether satellite is ready to go or not, I would just remind people that for over a year, for 18 months now, we've had high-speed internet being provided via satellite. It has been available. Viasat is now as a competitive satellite option, and we haven't even discussed the option of fixed wireless, which is quickly gaining ground in western Minnesota, southern Minnesota, in those areas where there is line of sight. What we're beginning to find out are these legacy fiber installations that people thought they could put fiber into the ground and everyone would snatch up their service. Now fixed wireless is coming along and offering higher bandwidth at a lower price, and the problem is the trenches have been dug and the money's already buried in the ground, literally, for that. So we're not even discussing fixed wireless. This is for a narrow subset of users, particularly, I would envision in northeastern Minnesota, where they're going to have few lines of sight because of obstructions. In addition, because it's very difficult to dig in rock or in hard soils, unlike in other parts of the state. It's a pilot project that would reach out to about 1,000 households that I think merits attention and work. With regards to Representative Anderson, the administrative cost of this, should we adopt this amendment, I would expect that we'll get some sort of fiscal note from the Office of Broadband Development, or they may reference a fiscal note to another area of the Department of Commerce. We're silent on that language. Representative Baker, did I answer your question and others, or did you have a follow-up? I'm happy to.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I guess part of my concern is that what would be the hurt if you were to remove the money component of this amendment and allow the satellite to be fairly and evenly looked at by the grant process to try to do that? And maybe they, with that signal and our intent here is if there should be some of that money going out there, I'm just concerned that we're putting a fixed amount out there that may be larger than it should have been. Maybe it's going to be smaller, but maybe the grant process would actually say in this area, satellite should be looked at. Maybe they've got some new things to look at, but is there a possibility you might want to remove the dollar amount so that we don't limit this idea, or over expand it that we're forcing it to and not doing, I think, what our intention is meant to do here, Mr. Chair.
So Representative Baker, the language as it's intended is for a pilot project, so it is a floor and a ceiling. It's only 5% of the overall appropriation. With regards to just eliminating it and having the satellites compete with the existing program, it doesn't work within the existing program. The existing program is project-based, so we're talking about cities or groups of a township or backhaul infrastructure, backhaul communications for a fixed wireless area. The satellite deployment is really for individuals in unserved areas. So I envision that an individual who has this problem is not being served, is able to reach out and be served. It's not a matter of a project or a specific geographic area. It's more the unserved area of the whole state. And the existing program just does not, it's not set up for an individual to apply and say, hey, I would like high-speed internet. That's why the set-aside instead of relying on the existing program. Representative Baker.
Mr. Chair, so if I'm not a satellite user now, I would be, and I'm in an unserved area, it's really then kind of in your intent, the first 1,000 people that call them up that are not a current user and in an unserved area, they could be eligible for this if it was passed and then put into law. The first 1,000 that would call up might be the ones who get this. Is that how that is your intention?
The intention would be to be first come, first served. Obviously, whether a person is in an unserved or underserved area is not known by every member of the public. Those resources are available. I would expect you to have some people who would apply and then decide they're not interested. You'd have other people apply to determine that they're actually in an underserved area. They would not be eligible. But that would be the intent, is basically a first in, first out.
And Mr. Chair, would the Office of Broadband then have to take those 1,000 calls and help identify if those are in that region or not, and who those providers would be then? How will the Office of Broadband be involved in this?
Well, so we have great mapping available that identifies what households are in unserved areas versus underserved areas. Whether they would do that or whether that be something that we would offset to the Department of Commerce to administer the program, I am silent on that in the language. I think the Office of Broadband Development may need a little bit of extra money to administer this. We'll look for a fiscal note from them so the amendment be adopted. But generally speaking, we're talking about a very small, very minor pilot project here. The biggest issue I could see was that there would be so much enthusiasm for my new idea to get internet to people at a lower cost than the current program that maybe that would be taxing. Representative Baker.
I still can't support the amendment.
All right, got it. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a quick question. While I'm currently extremely frustrated with our internet provider, I live in an area where of the state where it snows, and so I've never looked at satellite as a legitimate option. But in terms of reimbursing folks for the cost of installation, as I understand on 2.24 to 2.6, if I'm reading it. But in that area, Representative Baker brought up the point that usually the equipment is free. That's part of the incentive for purchasing the satellite service. Does this then set up a potential situation where we actually encourage the satellite providers to moving from free installation of the equipment to charging for the equipment, and then arguing that you can get the state to cover a chunk of the cost, and it'll actually end up delivering more expensive service to these individuals?
Representative Dabney, my understanding is that there are some installations that are free and some hardware that is free. There certainly are situations where installation and hardware are free. I'm willing to examine that a second time and take another look at it, or maybe have those dollars be repurposed into the monthly side of things. But the intention was to have it be expansive as a pilot project to try it out. Because of the limited, we're talking $750,000 here. We're talking about the potential for about 1,000 households. If that problem were to develop, I think we would identify it fairly but I don't, right now, my understanding is that you have both those types of sales plans. The problem with those ones that have the free installation, a lot of times they lock them down for 2 years. They have the 2-year service contract, and that may be, again, a consumer choice that people are not too excited about. But the intent was to be expansive and flexible, not to be limited and more expensive.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Seeing none, the chair renews his motion to have the 820 amendment adopted. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no?
No.
You can call for a division. I haven't hit the gavel yet. Did someone say division? All those in favor, please raise your hand. A sufficient number of hands having risen, the motion prevails. All right.